Welcome to today's video. Welcome to our first monthly wrap up of 2025. Can you believe it? And what a month we have had in January. We've had our first 5-star read, we've had our first series that we've started and completed in 1 month. We've had our first DNF of the year, and we've also had our first reading slump of the year. So it's been eventful overall. In the month of January, I read a total of 7 books and I DNF'd 2. So we went into 9 books altogether, but I didn't complete 9. I only completed 7 of those. But we're going to talk about all 9, of course. I did include quite a few of these in reading vlogs, so if you do want to see like my in-depth thoughts throughout reading these books, then I will leave a link to those reading vlogs down below. But let's get straight into it. The first book that I read in 2025 was Hidden Pictures by Jason Rekulak. This is a thriller. It's got a bit of a paranormal kind of element to it. We follow Mallory, who gets a job working after this 5-year-old. And this 5-year-old is really into art. He's always drawing pictures in his room. And Mallory starts looking at these pictures and realises that they start to get more and more sinister. There starts to be something a bit darker about them. And she realises that there might be something more to his drawings than just pictures. This was so good. I absolutely loved it. I read it so quickly because I was just so hooked, literally from chapter 1. The thing that I also really love about this is that you actually get the pictures in the book. So whenever Mallory actually finds one of the pictures, we then get to see it. And I just absolutely love that, and it really had a kind of creepy, eerie feeling to it as well, especially the further on you get in the book and the more kind of sinister these pictures get, because it's like we're actually finding these pictures as well. I just absolutely loved it, and it's become one of my favourite thrillers that I've ever read. And I rated this 4.5 stars. It was nearly a 5-star read. I don't actually know why it wasn't a 5-star read. When I think of this book, it is definitely more of a 5-star read than a 4-star read, but that's kind of why I went in the middle. And I absolutely loved it, and it's definitely a thriller that I'm going to continue recommending, because I think if you love thrillers, then you'd really enjoy this. And also I really enjoyed the sort of paranormal element to it as well, because I think this is the first paranormal thriller that I've read, I think, that I can remember anyway. I absolutely loved it. Very, very strong start to the year. And then I moved on to The Prison Healer by Lynette Doty, which if you follow me on TikTok, you're probably sick of me talking about this series, because I literally feel like I spent the whole of January talking and raving about this series because it has become my new obsession. I absolutely love it. If you take anything away from this video, let it be to pick up The Prison Healer, because I love it. This is a YA fantasy trilogy, and in the first one we follow Kiva, who is the prison healer, and we follow her in this death prison where basically the prisoners basically being worked really, really hard, and they essentially work until they die in that prison, which is why it's a death prison. And we follow Kiva, who is also a prisoner, but she's working as the prison healer, but also trying to survive in this prison at the same time. But there's a lot more to it as well, especially throughout the rest of the series, that I can't really explain because I don't want to spoil anything. But think elemental trials, elemental powers, a slow burn romance in there as well. So good. So good. Loved every single second of it. I just felt so connected with Kiva as a character, and I loved being with her throughout the whole series and seeing kind of how her character grew. And I really like anything kind of set in a prison setting, or working with criminals, or in like a psychiatric ward type thing, like anything to do in that sort of area I absolutely love. So this was right up my street, and I literally couldn't get enough of these characters and this world. So after The Prison Healer, which I rated 6 stars by the way, this was my first 6-star read of the year, I went straight into The Gilded Cage, which is the second book in the series. And again, I can't really explain what this one is about, just because I don't want to spoil anything for the first one. But I ended up rating this one 5 stars, and I really didn't know what to expect going into this one, just based on how the first one ended. But I was so pleasantly surprised. This one had a real feeling of anything could kick off at any minute. And that just kept you reading because you were just so hooked, and you just wanted to see how everything was going to kick off and what was going to happen. And the way that this one ended, I literally had to go into the last one, which is The Blood Traitor. So I literally read this whole series back to back because it got to the point where I actually couldn't imagine reading anything else. I was just so invested in this whole world that it would have felt weird to me to go into a different world with different characters. I just needed to finish the series and to see where these characters ended up. This one I rated 4 stars. So all in all, a 5-star series on average. I Absolutely love it. The thing that I really noticed about this one is that when you kind of think you know things about these characters, and especially the side characters, when you think you know stuff about them, Lynette Noni just continues to surprise you, and that was really evident in this book because I feel like we got to know the side characters so well. And the thing about how these side characters are done is that they almost feel like main characters because you just feel like you know them so well and you can just imagine what they look like, you can imagine their kind of mannerisms and how they act, and then you get to learn more about their background as well throughout the series. So each one of these characters just feels so thought out. This one on a lot of levels was very satisfying to read and how everything wrapped up and everything. There was one thing that I was kind of like, that's such a shame. That's such a shame. But that's all I'm gonna say. But I think that's the only thing that I would kind of, I don't know whether I would change it necessarily, but I think it probably did bring my rating down a little bit, and that's probably why it is a 4-star read. Still really high, still definitely recommend finishing the series because it was really good. It was really good. If you couldn't tell, I love the series. Then I went into Still Beating by Jennifer Hartman, which is a dark romance. This one we have Cora and Dean is Cora's soon-to-be brother-in-law, so he's her sister's fiance. These two really don't get on. They've not got on the whole time that Dean and Cora's sister have been together. They just really don't get on. So it's kind of an enemies situation. I don't think I'd necessarily call it enemies. I'd just call it a dislike for each other. And it follows these two and they get kidnapped and they get held hostage in this basement. It follows them in this situation, kind of how they deal with this situation, but then it also follows the fallout afterwards and just kind of how these two people are bonded through this traumatic experience that they had together. This one I read for a reading vlog, and if you've seen that vlog, you will know that this book literally left me traumatized. Like, that's the best way I can describe it. This book has a long list of trigger warnings, and I would definitely personally recommend reading that list of trigger warnings before you go into this, and to not take them lightly, because this deals with some really hard topics and deals with them in detail as well. It's not just kind of a mention of it, they deal with them in detail. So don't take the trigger warnings lightly. That's my first kind of thing that I want to say about this book. And I really wanted to love this book, and I really wanted to connect with these characters, and I honestly thought this was going to be a really high rated book for me, but I just didn't. It just left me feeling very kind of low, and I think it's because these characters go through such a traumatic experience, and then obviously they're then left to deal with this traumatic experience, and I feel like everything between them two, like the whole romance aspect, was just tainted for me by this experience, and that's what I really struggled to kind of let go of. I think I just found it very heavy and very intense, and it got to the point where I kind of was questioning whether I was actually enjoying reading it, and I feel like that's just not what you want when you're reading. You just want to be at least enjoying the book, even if it is a harder read. I will say that the actual writing was easy to read in terms of the writing style. Very quick, very easy. I think I literally finished this in like 2 days. So it is a very quick, easy read in terms of the writing style, but obviously the topics and what she's actually writing about is hard to read. And there were a couple of things that just kind of bothered me. Things that were associated with that night that the characters kind of held on to, and I just kind of didn't understand why they were holding on to it in the way that they were. I know that is so vague. I felt kind of frustrated with the way that that was done. That's all I'm going to say about this. I didn't actually give it a rating because I just felt like I was so confused on how I found it. It's one that I really wanted to love, and I can see why it's so popular and why so many people connect with it. But I think for me, it was just heavy, is the best way I could describe it. And then after reading Still Beating, I needed something fun, I needed something light-hearted, and I went into The Love Wager by Lynn Painter, and I loved this. It was exactly what I needed at the time. This is one of Lynn Painter's adult romances, and it was just such a fun little rom-com kind of vibe. We follow Hallie and Jack, and they meet because they basically have a one-night stand together, and they think that they're never going to see each other again, and then they end up seeing each other on this dating app. And they basically make a bet with each other of who can find their soulmate first. So they end up going on these dates separately but together. Like, they go to the same restaurant but on their separate dates, and they're kind of in this competition, but they're also kind of helping each other out at the same time. And it's just So fun. It's so fun. It's so fast paced, and it's kind of a cheesy rom-com. It has a feeling of a Hallmark movie, but in the best way possible. What I really liked about this is that a lot of this is dialogue and a lot of it is text messages between them. So it's just so quick and easy to read. It's one of those books where you literally forget that you're reading because you're just so invested in the conversation they're having. And I really loved the way that these two characters bounced off each other and the way that they joked with each other and how we were kind of let into their inside jokes as well. Just all around good vibes. Good vibes. And I ended up rating this 3.5, but I kind of feel like, is it more of a 4-star read? I've really been confused with my ratings this month, okay? But I did rate it 3.5. That might change depending on how much it kind of sticks with me, but it is definitely one that I would recommend. Okay, and then we have my first DNF of the year, which is gonna be a surprise. Brace yourselves. I picked up Brain Damage by Frida McFadden. I know. I'm a big Frida McFadden fan. I'm a Frida McFan. I absolutely love her books, but this one just did not hit in the same way. This is one of her earlier ones. I think it was written in like 2016, I want to say. And it's one of her self-published ones as well. And I was so excited to read this. It's a psychological thriller that follows Charlie, and Charlie gets shot in the head, and it basically goes through the right side of her brain. So she loses function of the right side, which also holds her memories of that night. So she has no idea who shot her. She has no idea really what happened. It follows both past and present timeline. So in the past, we learn that she's a dermatologist. We see her meeting with her clients, and then in the present timeline it follows her in this rehabilitation centre where she's basically in recovery. And I got to about 90 pages of this and it was just so slow, and it's just not what I needed at the time, because this is where I went into my reading slump and I just really wasn't in the mood to read. I didn't want to pick up anything. I picked up a Frida McFadden because I thought it was going to be really fast paced, really easy to read, and that's the reason that I DNF'd it, because I feel like I was quite a few chapters in and just nothing was happening. And I feel like we spent so much time with her in the present timeline in this rehab centre, and it was kind of a hard read in terms of very slow, very kind of, we were going through every single thing with her and I was just waiting for it to get to the actual plot. It is one that I think I could probably be persuaded to pick up again, but just at the time that I read this, it was a DNF for me. So this was our first DNF of the year. And then I went into Then There Was One by Wendy Cross, which is a YA thriller. It's kind of got a sci-fi element to it. It basically follows these 10 contestants who take part in this TV show contest, and this contest takes place on a different planet. And there's a big cash prize for the person that wins this contest. But when these 10 contestants get there, they realise that it's actually more of a survival game and that this is an actual deadly game that they're dealing with. And unfortunately, this is another one that I DNF'd. I DNF'd this, I think, about over 100 pages. Like, I was quite a way into the book. I just feel like it was very anticlimactic. When these 10 contestants started dying, there was no sort of tension, there was no build up to it. It was just like somebody ate some berries and they died and that was it. And I was just a bit like, oh, well, there goes another one. And there was no sort of thriller aspect to it as far as I got. I didn't feel connected with the 3 main characters that we followed. And it got to the point where it was a group of teenagers essentially just arguing over the same thing over and over again. And that was all their conversation ended up being. So that's when I decided to DNF it. And then the last book that I read in January was actually a new release that came out in January. And that's The Crash by Frida McFadden. First of all, can we just appreciate this sprayed edge version? I got this from The Works. I'm literally obsessed. I think that's one of the nicest sprayed edges I actually own. And this one, bear in mind I was in a reading slump at this point, so I didn't read this as quick as I probably would normally read a Frida McFadden. I think it took me about 5 or 6 days to read this. And this one we followed Tegan, and Tegan is 8 months pregnant and she's kind of got this situation going on at home. She decides to go and visit her brother for a little while because she's dealing with a lot. So she gets in the car, she starts driving to her brother's, and there's this big snowstorm that's happening, and she actually ends up crashing her car. She ends up stuck in the snowstorm with a broken ankle. She's 8 months pregnant and basically in the middle of nowhere, until this guy stops by and basically offers her a ride, and he takes her back to his little cabin in the woods situation. Because they're in this big snowstorm, the hospital's too far away, so he's like, you can stay here and I will drive you to the hospital in the morning when the snow is cleared. And when she gets there, she meets his wife, so it's this couple in this cabin, and she starts to realise that maybe she's walked into more danger than she was originally in if she'd just stayed in the car. She starts to realise that something isn't quite right, something weird is going on, and that she and her baby are in danger. And that whole concept, I was so intrigued by it. I thought I was going to absolutely love this. And the thing is about Freida McFadden's writing is that it is so easy to read and so fast paced. And I was enjoying this story, but it just kind of fell flat for me at the end. I feel like we spent so much time with Tegan stuck in this basement of this cabin. Basically, the whole entire book was set in this basement. And then I was really hoping for some big twists at the end, and for me it just fell flat and I didn't get that jaw-dropping twist moment. I had some crazy theories going on in my head when I was reading this, and literally none of those theories happened. Nothing even remotely crazy happened in my opinion. There were definitely twists, but they just weren't the kind of twist that I was expecting from a Freida McFadden. And I think that's where I was a little bit disappointed with this, especially after spending so much time with her, practically the whole book, in this basement, stuck with her and her broken ankle and her basically struggling in the dark. And literally when I finished this, I just kind of thought, what was the point of all that? What was the point? Which I'm so sad about, because that's 2 Freida McFadden books this month that I just haven't absolutely loved. And to be honest, I haven't actually rated this one yet. I genuinely don't know where this sits. Like, it's not a bad book. And for the most part, I was enjoying it, but it was only until the end that I was just kind of like, oh, okay. I think for rating it's probably like a 2.5 or a 3 maybe. That seems so harsh. I think it probably is more of a 2.5 for me, which I feel kind of sad about, to be honest. That makes me sad because this is one of my most anticipated releases this year as well. But they're my thoughts on The Crash by Freida McFadden, and they're all the books that I read this month. But before I go, we have to do Book of the Month, which is something that I started in my monthly wrap-ups last year, which, if you're new here, is basically where I name the book of the month for me. So this is my favourite read, my favourite book of the month, and I think it's really fun to look back on as well. And for this month, you could probably already guess, it's gonna have to be The Prison Healer by Lynette Noni. This whole series in general, but if I had to pick my favourite book from the series, it would be the first one. I just loved it. I loved the whole setting. I loved getting to know these characters. And I just love Kiva and Jaren. I love them. I will literally not stop recommending this whole series. It's become one of my favourite series. And I feel kind of worried, actually, that I found such a good series so early on in the year. Which is actually exactly what happened last year with Powerless. I read Powerless in January last year, and that ended up being my top book of that entire year. So I don't know what it is about January, but something's in the air. Anyway, that brings us to the end of this video. I would absolutely love to know what your book of the month is, what your favourite read was this month. So please let me know in the comments. And thank you so much for being here. Thank you for watching today's video. I really hope you enjoyed, and I will hopefully see you in my next one.